What is up, everyone? Wayne here. I didn't intend on doing another albums ranked video so soon, but the positive response to the last one and the overwhelming demand for Ariana made me decide to push this one to the top of my release schedule. So, and also I haven't talked about Ariana since I did my 3-part video series on her, which, by the way, if you haven't checked that out, I highly suggest you do. I'm just really proud of that series, so check that out. I'll put a link in the description. Yeah, and so we're gonna dive in. We're gonna rank Ariana Grande albums. Same rules as before. It's my opinion, and let me know down below what you think and what your rankings are. All right, starting out at number 6, at the bottom, we have Ariana's second album, My Everything. I see a lot of people talk down on My Everything, even going so far as to call it Ariana's worst, and even flat out, just a bad album. And while I definitely don't agree with the latter statement, it is, when compared to her other albums, her worst, or least best. But anyways, I hadn't really given her pre-Sweetener albums a solid listen prior to doing this ranking, so I went through and I listened to Yours Truly, and I listened to My Everything, and I listened to Dangerous Woman for the first time in a long time, all the way through. And I came to the realization that My Everything isn't a bad album. It's just kind of forgettable. But hear me out. There are plenty of hits and gems on this album, and there's a lot of, great Ariana songs on here. But as a whole, as a body of work, it's just kind of there. My Everything's biggest shortcoming is that it lacks an identity or theme as a body of work. And I'm not saying that an album has to have some deep, well thought out meaning to be good or memorable, but when you compare this album to the rest of Ariana's discography, this one is just the least outstanding. It's weird to me because it has undisputable hits like Problem and Break Free, Love Me Harder, Bang Bang, and some of my all-time favorites like Best Mistake and Break Your Heart Right Back, and the criminally underrated Only One. But as a whole, My Everything feels like an Ariana Grande playlist rather than an album. Not to mention that the track list does not flow well at all. It's almost like they didn't put any thought into what order the songs were in. It bounces back and forth from slow to mid-tempo to upbeat, and it's just there's not a cohesive flow to it. For example, Hands on Me. Why would you put a song like Hands on Me in between Just a Little Bit of Your Heart and My Everything? That is just an awful place for that song to be. I honestly used to defend My Everything a lot, and while I love it regardless, after giving it another listen, I realized why so many people, including me now, honestly, rank it so low in her catalog. All right, coming up next at number 5, we have Yours Truly. I feel like I've spent the entirety of Ariana's 10-year-long music career waiting for her to give us a more mature Yours Truly, like a spiritual successor to that album. I'm a bona fide R&B Ariana fan, a mocha grande, if you will. I love all of Ariana's music, pop or R&B, and everything in between, but I'm sorry, that girl's voice is just made for R&B. And I feel like Yours Truly is the most authentically R&B that we've seen her thus far, and that's so crazy because this album is 10 years old. And I'm not saying that she just abandoned R&B altogether after this one. It felt like she was constantly riding that line between pop and R&B after Yours Truly, but she was kind of leaning more on the former. We still got a good bit of R&B, on My Everything, but then Dangerous Woman, we got more pop. Sweetener went back to the R&B direction, but it was more experimental, more, avant-garde. But then Thank You Next was complete pop, just about, it was just full-on pop. And then Positions was more R&B that we had gotten from her for a while, but if you're going by the pattern that we've seen with her albums so far, her comeback album is going to be, mostly pop. But I mean, she could change it up, and I'm going to love what she puts out regardless. But anyways, back to Yours Truly. I love this album. It's such a cute and fun debut. It has so many forgotten gems on it. Honeymoon Avenue is such a quintessential Ariana Grande song, in my opinion, and one of the best album openers I've ever heard. It's literally the perfect song to open her debut album with, and by extension, to open her music career with. I love it so much. Baby I is one of her more forgotten and underrated singles, and I wish she'd perform this one more. Piano, Daydreaming, The Way, You'll Never Know. Honestly, there isn't a single bad song on this album, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it suffers from that same issue that most debut albums have, which is that everything that came after is so much bigger and better that it gets overshadowed and overlooked and forgotten. And that's sad, because Yours Truly is a really solid album, and I love it. Right at number 4, we have Dangerous Woman. I can tell a lot about you if Dangerous Woman is your favorite album, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. I don't mean it in a bad way. I just know the type of Ariana Grande fan you are. I see Dangerous Woman as the end of an era, or rather an arc in Ariana's career, as everything after it was a whole other level creatively and aesthetically. Dangerous Woman was very much the completion of an arc that started with her debut. It took the best parts of Yours Truly and My Everything and married them together in a more mature and well thought out package. The bunny ears annoyed me though, I can't lie, I hated those things. While I love this album, I don't really like any of the single choices though, except for Into You. The title track is my least favorite lead single of hers. I don't care if Focus sounded too much like Problem and everyone hated. I love that song, but Dangerous Woman worked way better as a lead single, I can't lie. Focus deserves more respect though. Into You is absolute pop perfection. It's a crime that this song was not number 1. It's objectively one of Ariana's best. Side to Side is pretty meh to me, honestly. I know it's one of her most popular songs, but I never was a fan of this one. I just, I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it either. And I have a love-hate relationship with Everyday. It's catchy, but it as a single, when there were so many better choices, just irritates me to no end. Be Alright and Let Me Love You were both pushed as buzz singles, but are far better than some of the actual singles, and could have been and should have been pushed as official singles. Sometimes, I Don't Care, Touch It, and Knew Better Forever Boy really sold this album for me as well. I adore these songs so much, and they don't receive nearly enough attention at all. And again, they are all better than the latter 2 singles from the album, and would have worked far better if they were pushed instead. Overall, Dangerous Woman is my favorite from the first arc of Ariana's career, but unfortunately, it just can't hold a candle to anything that came after it. Alright, we're down to the final 3, and at the number 3 spot we have Thank You Next, which is arguably her magnum opus. I actually wasn't the biggest fan of Thank You Next when it first came out, if I'm being honest. I don't know why, it just didn't click with me initially, especially coming after Sweetener, which was this cool experimental pop R&B hybrid, and then you get Thank You Next, which pretty much threw all of that out of the window in favor of pure pop. And there was nothing wrong with that. I just didn't want that at the time. Honestly, I didn't appreciate this album until maybe a year after it came out. And now, here it is in my top 3 favorite Ariana albums. A lot of what I would have said about this album I already said in my Thank You Next video, so check that out to hear it. I'll use this opportunity though to touch on some things that I didn't cover in that video. Needy and NASA are 2 of my favorite Ariana Grande songs of all time, and I've seen countless people call NASA a bad song, but I will continue to defend that song with my life. Bad Idea and In My Head are also 2 undisputed highlights of this album, and definitely should have been singles. I love those 2 songs so much as well. Overall, my biggest gripe with this album is that more of its songs should have been given a chance to shine as far as singles go. So I guess my issue is more with the era than the album itself. Thank You Next has so much more life left in it, and honestly, one more big hit could have come out of this album if Ariana and the label chose to do so. I have an entire concept in my head of how I would have done the era if I had the chance to redo it. I don't know, I might make a video about that in the future. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see down in the comments. Alright, and at number 2 we have Sweetener. I initially was torn between Sweetener and Thank You Next for the number 2 spot, but honestly it should have been no contest from the start when I think about it. Don't get me wrong, I adore Thank You Next and what it did for Ariana's star power, but Sweetener just has an incredibly special place in my heart. This album sounds absolutely like nothing else in Ariana's catalog. I adore everything about it. Its aesthetic, the silver gray hair that Ariana had for the era, everything about it just makes me so happy. Sweetener is honestly a comfort album for me. It's just a feel-good body of work. No Tears Left to Cry and God is a Woman are absolute elite when it comes to Ariana Grande songs. And let me take this time to speak on Pharrell's involvement with the album. So many pop Ariana stans were quick to say that Pharrell, quote unquote, ruined the album, and I hated that so much. Okay, fine, even if you don't like what he did on the album, that's one thing, but Pharrell Williams is a legend, and you cannot deny that him collaborating with Ariana was iconic. And he's very much responsible for the distinct sound of Sweetener that makes me love it so much. I view Sweetener and Thank You Next as almost one complete era, but I will say that I hate that both albums were released so close together, only because, just like Thank You Next, Sweetener also had so much more life left in it as far as singles and the era go. Breathing, the final single, didn't even have time to breathe, no pun intended, because it was so overshadowed by Thank You Next, the song coming out just a few weeks later. REM is a masterpiece, the title track is a bop, Successful, Every Time are great, Borderline is a gem, not to mention that she had the Missy Elliott on the song. Better Off, Good Night and Go, and Get Well Soon are all absolute magic as well. I'm obsessed with those songs, and I think they're some of Ariana's absolute best. This entire album is pure art. I don't know what else to say. I'm obsessed with it. And at one point, it was my undisputed all-time favorite Ariana Grande album until a certain album came out in 2020. Positions is my all-time favorite Ariana Grande album, and it is one of my favorite albums of all time. I've seen a lot of people give different opinions on Positions, some good and some bad, but a lot of them come from a very surface level opinion of the album. If you know me, you know I look beyond the music for what bodies of work represent, and while Positions is my favorite Ariana Grande album musically, I also love what it represents for Ariana. Positions represents two pillars for Ariana Grande. Career-wise, it represents a certain freedom for her creatively and artistically. It was a liberation for her. She was being more carefree than ever and open about her sexuality as a woman and far more candid in her music. Despite songs like 34, 35 and Nasty, being just sexy songs to some people on the surface, to me, I think them, along with just, the album as a whole, is a declaration of Ariana's comfort with sharing that part of herself with the world. And there was a certain level of maturity. And that's what I love the most about Positions. There was just a certain level of maturity that you don't see in any of her other albums. And that's what makes Positions at the top of my list, honestly. And personally, Positions was also a complete display of unconditional love. She was in love, newly married, and it was different this time. A lot of this is explained in my video on Positions, but I just love the way that this album conveys its message. At its core, Positions is a declaration of unconditional love. The title track is the perfect example of this, and speaking of the title track, it is my absolute favorite lead single from Ariana, as well as being in my top 5 songs from her. It's such an enchanting song. I can't describe how it makes me feel. The production, the way her voice sounds on it. And speaking of vocals, I don't know, but it's just on this album, the way that she layers her vocals just sound different. They sound like a step above what we got on previous albums, and you can hear it especially on songs like Shut Up, Position, 630, and the Someone Like You interlude. I can't put into words how this album makes me feel. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, and it is hands down my most revisited Ariana Grande album. I still listen to it, I won't say daily, but I listen to it far more regularly than any other of her albums. I believe Positions, both the album and the era, represent another shift in Ariana's career. I already stated that I think Yours Truly, My Everything, and Dangerous Woman formed the first arc of Ariana's career, and then Sweetener, Thank You Next, and Positions form the second arc. And whenever Ariana returns to music, I believe it will be the start of the third arc of her career, and I'm so excited to see what she will do. it's just, it sounds like nothing else that I've ever heard. And not to mention her vocals are absolutely angelic. I'm kind of just stumbling all over the place. I'm so tired. It is 4 in the morning. Oh my God. Okay.